Today I'm in Valparaiso, Indiana, talking with Sally G. Holterhoff. Sally, of course, we always call you. I want to comment on the fact that this is December of 2014, and we're here at the law school, actually the annex where the clinic offices are, in a delightful room, a conference room. And I appreciate Sally letting us, arranging for this room. I probably should mention that you are the Government Information Reference Librarian and Associate Professor of Law Librarianship here at Valparaiso University Law School. With that sort of by way of basic introduction,
Right.
could we talk a little bit about you as an individual or a person? Could we start by asking if you could tell us a little bit about what life was like, perhaps not only today, but when you were young?
Yes, well, I was born in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm a Midwestern person almost my entire life. I grew up in a neighborhood just north of the Ohio State University campus, and Ohio State is a very important thing in the history of my family, as is education. My family, a lot of my father and my grandfather were chemists, and my brothers, I have two younger brothers, and they kind of followed the science path. And a lot of the people in my family, both the men and women, education was a really important part of their move off the farm and into white collar life. My grandfather was a professor of organic chemistry, and my dad was his PhD student, and that's how my parents met, and my grandparents met at Ohio State. So I have lots of memories growing up of time spent dragged on the weekends to my dad's office on campus, or Sunday dinners at the faculty club at Ohio State. And so unusually, maybe a little in my family, education for women was really a value too. And I even have my maternal great-grandmother graduated from Ohio Wesleyan University in 1880, so
that would be a bit early for a lot of people to graduate, let alone a woman.
Yeah, it was kind of unusual, and of course I never knew her, but anyway, so growing up I went to public schools in Columbus, and I had a great childhood. My parents were very encouraging of our education, and we were pretty much expected to get A's, my brothers and I, and luckily we were able to achieve that. And my mom's field was really English and journalism, and she didn't work after my brothers and I were born, but spent a lot of time coaching us on those matters. And in high school I loved the journalism class, the one class they had, and I loved English, and I was editor of the high school newspaper, and so that that kind of had me off. I guess maybe some of it was gender stereotype, but the science thing didn't really interest me, although my brothers both followed that route. And so I headed off to college wanting to do English. That was my plan. So and I went to Miami University for 2 years and then transferred to Ohio State. And that was an exciting time in college in the late 60s. There was a lot going on, and looking back, I don't think I ever would have thought of being a librarian at that point, although I did really like libraries. I mean, I liked going to them. I studied there.
Had to use them extensively.
Oh, yeah. And
with your work.
At Ohio State, at that point, the university library was divided up into a lot of department libraries. So I got a job in the journalism library just a few hours a week. And there was also an English library, which I loved going there. That was a great place to study. But so I graduated, but my parents said, you have to have some job you can get. So I majored in education ultimately with my education and English and journalism in there, and got a job teaching high school. And I was 21. I was pretty young when I graduated from college.
English and journalism.
I did. I taught English and journalism.
So you're sort of sticking to your roots there.
Yeah, it was 17 and 18-year-olds, and that was really fun. I enjoyed that. And I had met my future husband at Ohio State, and he was still in school. So when he graduated 2 years later, we got married. And he took a job he was an engineer, ceramic engineer, so he took a job in Kohler, Wisconsin. So we moved up to Sheboygan, Wisconsin. So still the Midwest, but away from home. And I managed to find a job teaching junior high English, which I found was far different. I didn't enjoy that as much. And when we did the career unit in the library at this junior high, I started thinking about a new career for myself, and that library looked like a pretty good place in the school to be. So I started doing some of my own research and found there were several library science programs that I could commute to from Sheboygan. So I went to University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, took a leave from my teaching job, and it took me 18 months to get my MLS, and in the meantime we decided we would start a family. So I finished my master's program, my comprehensive exam, when I was 8.5 months pregnant, and had our son. Didn't want to work full-time, so I found some part-time subbing jobs, and I was story lady at a public library. That was kind of fun. And then our daughter was born, and then we moved for my husband's career advancement. We moved to Philadelphia, and again I found part-time jobs, public library jobs. But by the time we moved yet again to Northwest Indiana, my kids were still not in school, but I really did want to have a real job, and didn't find my way to the law school right away. I did something else at a public library for about 6 months, and then Matt Downs was the director of the law library at Valparaiso University, and a very young one. He was in his early 30s then.
I remember Matt.
Yeah, and he hired me. He wanted to create a position to run the depository program. They'd become a depository, as lots of schools did in 78, 79, when the law passed.
The new law had come in.
Yeah, so, but he didn't really have the budget to hire a full-time person. So it was perfect match, because I wanted to work part-time, and I knew
That's
nothing.
right, you had your other responsibilities at home.
I knew nothing about government documents, never took that class in library school, and I didn't know anything about law, no lawyers in my family or anything, but I was, I guess, determined I was going to learn fast, and he hired me, and so that was great. So it was kind of like, I wouldn't say it was just an accident, but it was kind of lucky that I found my way to a law library, because I think that was probably a very good place that I was meant to be. And another lucky thing was that the law librarians at Valparaiso University had not really been active in AA, or maybe even gone, I don't know for sure, but hadn't gone to many meetings. But 1982 was Detroit annual meeting, so that was my first annual meeting. We could drive up there, so there wasn't any travel budget, but we drove up to Detroit, and when I got to that meeting and saw what was going on there and met the people, I was like totally entranced with that all, and I thought, this is great. I really want to be involved in this. And so I went to the GovDocs SAS and was so impressed with everything, and raised my hand and volunteered for things, because they were talking about in 2 years it was going to be in San Diego, and I thought, oh, I got to find a way to get to San Diego. So I volunteered to
better get on some committees, you think?
Coordinate a program, and I came out of nowhere, but they were looking for people that wanted to work, and that was the start of so many good things. So I determined for myself that was going to be something I would pursue, and but yeah. That's good.
Well, it sounds, often I ask how, if you were recruited into law librarianship, but it sounds like you kind of just fell into it.
Yeah, I did in a way.
Matt presumably helped, but by hiring you, but it didn't exactly recruit you, I guess.
No, I guess, I didn't have a plan for my career. I never could have quite planned it, but it all turned out great. So, yeah.
Well, I remember that meeting in Detroit quite well. We were in the Renaissance Center.
Yes,
The General Motors headquarters is in another one of the towers. And one day, and you may remember this too, there was a tornado in the area, and you could see it from some of the upper floors.
Oh, I had forgotten that, but that
rained
sounds
like
kind
crazy.
of very. I remember it was bad weather when we were up there, but yeah.
Yeah. But, aside from that, it was a good meeting.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And maybe in a way that was made it more interesting.
Yeah, I was very impressed with everything I saw there, and how friendly everybody was,
Mhm.
and it seemed like a really good thing to get involved in. Yeah.
So you began in anticipation, as you have candidly said, of wanting to figure out how to get sent to a meeting in San Diego.
Yes, yeah.
Which was also a very nice meeting, and they all
Oh,
are,
yeah,
but that
yeah.
was particularly nice.
Yeah, and by the time of that meeting, Matt had left Valparaiso, and we had hired Mary Persine as director, which was the beginning of another good thing. She was a great colleague and supporter and mentor to me, so that was good. And yeah, she just came on board right before that San Diego meeting. But
Okay. So you must have thought maybe San Diego was going to come up again later on, because you certainly have had an active professional life outside of the university as well.
Right. Well, my work at the university has been very rewarding, but it's also, I was able to manage to find lots of other things to do along the way. Yeah, I mean, here at Valparaiso, we had, through the years, I've been here a very long time now, like 30 years.
31 years, because I
yeah.
remember last year it was your 30th year.
Yeah,
and, so you're not a job hopper.
No, and actually the math on that, the first couple of years I was part-time, and they don't really count that for your full-time, it's full-time employment,
Yeah.
But during the time that I worked for the law school, I mean, we moved to what was a new building in 1986. Now it's like the old building, and a lot of I guess some of the notable things about my work at Valparaiso would be our teaching legal research, which is started from pretty much just going into legal writing classes to really developing our own curriculum, and we're very proud of that. But it took a long time to develop. But thinking back, when I first started, because I was government documents, one of the legal writing instructors said, "Oh, well, you must know about legislative history. Will you come and talk to my class?" And of course, I really didn't, but I
hope you were a quick study.
I studied up really quick on that, enough to do a presentation, and then I was really, so became so interested in that, and that's been a big interest of mine, and one of the things that I've developed the instructional stuff for legal research classes. But back in the 80s, the librarians didn't have faculty status other than the director, which then, by then was Mary. But we did campaign for that, because there were the undergrad librarians had faculty status and we didn't, so we were able to achieve that, and that kind of led to more chances for us to teach. But we, sort of worked our way to a separate required 1 credit for 3 semesters now. We have 3 semesters of basic legal research, and so yeah, it's been good.
Being on the faculty when that came about probably also opened up a bit wider the opportunities to go to meetings where you would learn things, but also impart your own knowledge to colleagues.
Yes, yeah, and that was a very good thing that it sort of, this impetus for more of that to happen. And librarians at our school are on faculty committees, so I've been involved in that through the years, and been on a lot of search committees, including, I don't know if I was on the search committee when we hired Mary Persine, but I definitely was when we hired Emily Janoski-Halen several years ago. But we haven't had a lot of turnover on that job, but other positions.
That may be the sign that you had a very good director.
Yes, yeah, and 20 years ago we started a library newsletter, and I started that and was the editor, and it's sort of fallen into disuse now because we haven't really converted it to an online thing yet, but that's another.
don't have a library blog, I think they call it?
We've had a couple, but the students, our law students, have a blog now, and I help with some of the editing work with that, but so lots of good through the years we had to automate our catalog, and that involved the government documents depository part of my job led me to a lot of other things in IIL, starting with the GovDocs SAS, but then the into government relations and depository library council I was on. So a lot of it just kind of seemed to flow sort of naturally, but looking back, it's all sort of a pattern. So yeah.
Well, if we can kind of refocus
Sure.
now, or focus on some of your work outside with the profession more generally, you know, I look in preparing for these conversations that I've done quite a few of, I look at people's background in terms of what they've done in the association and in similar associations for some of our colleagues. And yours is a rather long list of accomplishments and you know, committee chairs, various roles, culminating, or maybe not culminating, but certainly in a way culminating as president of AELL, where you were president in 2006 and 2007.
Yeah, yeah.
Would you like to talk about perhaps some of your work in the association, or
sure,
even more broadly than that? And then I'd like to sort of ask you to talk a little bit about perhaps your year as president.
Okay.
It's a few years back now, so maybe you
Yeah.
can take it in perspective and talk about some of the things that were going on in the profession at that time.
Yeah, I'd be glad to do that. You know, talking about my work through the years, that kind of I mean, I wasn't an obvious shoo-in from the beginning, like this woman's going to be IIL president, because I feel like I didn't have a pedigree. I hadn't come from a great program. I didn't have a natural mentor in the association, but I surely found lots of them through the years. And looking
Well,
back, I mean,
you can't say this, but I can. But we can spot talent, and
Yeah,
we take
well,
advantage of those people by
thank
asking them
you.
to run
Yeah.
for president.
yeah, I mean, I guess looking back at the list of things that I've done, what really stands out for me is not, you know, just that I did you know, that I was on something or had a membership in some committee or a chairmanship, but more things that were accomplished in that regard. And just one thing that I got into that's outside law librarianship in the state of Indiana, the documents librarians were active, and of course I got, because of the depository, got involved in that. And the Indiana Library Association in the 1980s had a GovDocs group, but by around the early 90s, we sort of decided that wasn't the best place for our group of depository librarians of all different kinds of libraries to be. So we started our own little independent group called Indigo. And so I was one of the founding members of that, along with a couple other people, Steve Hayes from Notre Dame and some other non-law librarians. And that group is still going. So I'm kind of proud of that. And then like within IIL, I mean, GovDocs SAS kind of led to my work in legislative things, and both Mary Persine and I somehow got appointed to a committee, a IIL committee in the 1980s, the Legislation and Legal Developments Committee, which we were kind of excited until we found out that really the charge of that committee was just to inform the membership. There wasn't really any authority to do any real advocacy on behalf of the association, which really surprised us, I guess. But our committee, we were on there 84 to 86, worked on a legislative policy for the association, federal legislative policy, and the board, probably wisely at the time because there was no real authority for it, tabled it because really the thought was the association shouldn't be speaking with a single voice. We should just do it as individuals.
I remember that thinking.
Yeah, and that all changed dramatically thanks to some really far-thinking people in the late 1980s that we would do that. And then the Government Relations Committee and the Washington Affairs Representative and Bob Oakley and Joanne Zeke, and there's so many people, and Penny Hazelton appointed me to be the second chair of the Government Relations Committee, and I got to work with Bob Oakley, and that was a really daunting, humbling assignment to be working with Bruce Kennedy, Tim Coggins. There were Susan Lewis. That was just a fantastic year. I felt so unworthy in a way, but so challenged, like this is my big chance, and I worked so hard that year not just bragging on myself, but to try to live up to that. And that was like a dream team. That committee, everybody was on the committee, was worked hard, and that those matters led to some other things that I did. I was also active in 2 chapters because Valparaiso were situated near Chicago, but also in the the Oral, Ohio region. So I was, involved in both of those, probably more so in CALL, and was president of CALL, and then I became council of chapter president's chair, and then Frank Hodak got me involved in this chapter relations work. So a lot of things led to the next thing. I mean, somehow I chaired the PR committee twice, and one time we did the Excellence in Marketing Awards, set that up, and that's still going with 5 categories. The second time I did it was in 2003 or 4, and we set up the Day in the Life photo contest, which is still going, and the public
Look at some of the
Published
sort of
Initiatives
fun.
Caucus, which is still going, I think, or it has been going. And just one other thing I'll mention, because I don't have great credit for this, but when Tori Trotta was academic Law Library's SAS chair in 99-2000, she appointed me as awards committee chair, and she said we should create a service award for our SIS, just as the others have seemed to have things like that. So I worked on that, and then I thought, we need a name for this, because the other ones have names, and that's kind of classy. So I thought to contact Frank Hodak, and who would be an appropriate name? He knows all the history. So he suggested Frederick Charles Hicks, because that was the first academic law librarian, that was scholar, that was president of AA blah, blah. So we named the award, and it was first awarded in 2000. And so even though I did that with a whole lot of other people, I'm just happy to see those things and think, I know how that started too. I was there with the birth of that. It was very cool things. So
Well, Hicks was the librarian for many years at Yale, the law librarian. They called him a librarian. Even, I don't know if Blair Kaufman is there now.
Yeah.
That may be his official title. It's just traditionally been the title.
As librarian, yeah. Well, and it was really cool to pull that history back in, and now with that name attached to the award, it gives people a reason to go back and look at the history, which is very, very nice, yeah. So.
Well, it's good to think of our roots, I think.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, in a way, this project that we're talking about, talking before the cameras today, is to sort of perpetuate the memory of our era
in
Yeah.
the profession.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't live in the past, but having a past is a good thing, even for people that don't want to necessarily look at it. This is a long enterprise, and we're just one little part of one section of one period of time. But then you mentioned about my presidency. That was, being elected president was just a wonderful, awesome experience, and
Besides a lot of work.
so many things, yeah. And that year was a very exciting one for me. One thing was that because of all my advocacy work in the past, I realized that this gave me a chance, the issue of authentication, to really try to do something about redefining what's, authentic, trustworthy legal information in the online digital age. And
I remember a lot of us in the profession were concerned that what's there today might not be there tomorrow, or it might be there tomorrow but in a little different way.
Right. So trying to think of what to do about that, and with the help of a small task force that I set up, and great help, tremendous help from Mary Alice Bache, who was in our Washington office then, we planned a summit, a national summit that was held in April of 2007, and invited 50 delegates, many of them outside people, to bring together a bunch of people who weren't at that point necessarily talking to each other, and come up with some strategies or whatever we can do. And the thing that really did happen from that is one of the delegates was the Uniform Law Commission Commissioner Michelle Timmons, and that led us directly into UELMA. Eventually, it took a while, several more years, but sometimes, we didn't know for sure that anything could possibly happen afterwards, for sure, but it did, thanks to the fact that we had thing. And of course, there was a lot of work went into it ahead, the state by state survey of what each state was doing on their materials. But so that was probably like, I have to look back and say that was a great part of my presidential year. There were some challenges, though. The theme for my annual meeting that year was Rise to the Challenge, and one of the challenges that they pick the locations, as you know, for annual meetings, a number of years in advance.
Sure.
Well, and of course, in 2005 was Hurricane Katrina, and so here we have our annual meeting coming to a city that when I went for my pre-visit, as vice president, it was still kind of a lot of disarray, but they pulled it together and we had a really good meeting there. Also, that was the first year we were implementing a new schedule for the annual meeting, going from 5 days to 4 days, which meant a whole lot of changes and adjustments and all kinds of things. So that was another challenge. And then in November of my presidential year, our executive director left unexpectedly, and so we had to figure out what to do about that. And luckily, Steve Ligda, who had recently retired as director of finance and administration, was willing to come back in the interim position. But that was kind of a little bit of uncertain time there, and we had formed a search committee. But the good thing is that we were able to find and hire Kate Hagan, who's still with us. So that was, even though I never really got to work with her very much during my presidential year, I'm very happy that we brought.
Chosen well, because she does do a lot of
Yeah,
very good
well,
things, and she's been around quite a while now.
Oh, yeah,
I think
we brought
she
her
and
on.
Roger Parent are the two longest serving executive directors, and she may well be ahead of him. Not yet, eventually.
Yeah, so that was something, and I was really pleased with, and my presidential year resulted in her bringing her on board. And I had some wonderful travels that year as president too, which to ABA was in Honolulu that year, and IAL was in
somebody has to go there.
Yeah, St. Petersburg, Russia. So those
Yeah.
were really good trips, but I enjoyed, and the people that I worked with, and so wonderful experience. Yes.
You got to the bio meeting in the UK?
I did, yeah. That was that June before I took office, but it was, in Brighton, and there's so many things good happened from these people I met there. I met some French law librarians that I was able to see when I went to Paris, at other trips, and so.
The interesting thing is now we as AELL work with these other groups on certain conferences from
Yes,
time to time. That was all just beginning about the time I was in the hierarchy. And I wasn't responsible. It was mostly my predecessors by a couple of years, but it was nice to see it start.
Oh yeah, it was great, and I think that and the Canadian Association, that it's wonderful to see how these other groups work, and we can learn a lot from each other.
Yeah.
So.
The Canadian Association, though it's independent, has been for many years, sort of started out as I don't know if they call it a chapter of ALL. I don't remember if we had that term at the time, but it was sort of a quasi-chapter, if not a real one.
Yes, that's an interesting piece of history too there, Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. Can I ask you a question? You may ask me to clip this out, but
sure.
Did you ever think in your wildest imaginations as you were coming up in government documents that you would be a personal friend, having worked with the superintendent of documents?
Oh, well.
Mary Alice Bache is in
No,
that role.
Mary Alice, no.
Well, that's not honest.
No, in fact, back in the 80s when I was GovDocs as chair, and we were having the annual meeting was in New York City, and I was supposed to organize something where we would take the superintendent of documents out to dinner because he was speaking at the conference, and I was like, I've learned so much through the years, but how do you arrange this? How do we pay for it? How do we get him there? So many things about that with that august title. And of course, Mary Alice Bache, I met her in the early 90s probably through the Depository Library Council work, but, she became just, an awesome friend and colleague through all the years that she worked in our Washington Affairs office. So no, I didn't imagine that I could have never imagined that I would ever be double president. But I do have to say that, some of my friends through the years that were, mentors of sorts, would say something like, someday you'll be up there on, at the annual meeting, closing banquet. And I was like, no, that would never happen.
You have to be on your good behavior at the
Yeah,
banquet because everyone's watching you.
Yeah, but I guess it does. I think it's good to maybe to say that to somebody that hasn't thought of that, because it did kind of put that little idea in my mind. Maybe would that ever happen? So yeah.
Well, it happened, and
Yeah.
for good reason.
Yeah.
As far as I can see.
Yeah, but it was a lot. It was the long process to get there, and then I think one thing that's been really nice for me is even after being president. What do you do after you're double president? You just have that purple ribbon, but are you just a has-been? But I've had some wonderful opportunities to do other things after that as well. One thing I'd kind of forgotten until recently, I guess you block certain things. Right after I was done being president, there was testimony that needed to be given for the public printer nominee, Robert Tapella. So Mary Alice arranged that I would be the one to do that. So she helped me, prepare the statement, and it was a huge amount, and then practiced, and it had to be shorter, and then had to be shorter again. And so I flew to DC with my statement memorized. We met with the public printer nominee and his staff. Mary Alice and I went out to dinner. I went back to my hotel, ran through it one more time. Phone rang. It's the Robert Tapella. The hearing's been postponed indefinitely. It's probably never going to happen.
Oh.
So it was such a letdown, because I had, honestly, from having worked with GovDocs, I was looking forward to my name being in the CIS index and in ProQuest Congressional. Didn't happen. They never did have that hearing. He just got confirmation off the book some way, but so
At least he got it. That was
he did get it.
right,
yeah. But
underlying.
I was so close to that, getting to that hearing room or whatever. But other things that happened. The thing that precipitated this was really sad, the death of Bob Oakley later in the year in 2007. But Ann Fessenden, my successor as president, appointed a review committee, Washington Affairs Office Review Committee, to decide what we were going to do with the loss of Bob. And so we did do a whole lot of study. That was kind of good to go back and look at the whole history of the Washington Affairs Office. So I enjoyed that. I always like things that you have to go back and pull out the old stuff and figure out what to do now. And so that was a very good experience. I was just really excited when Darcy Kirk asked me if I appointed me to be the representative to the International Federation of Library Associations, IFLA. And that has been a really good place for me to, devote some work now, because I did go to 3 of their meetings, and even though my representative term's done, I'm still going, and I'm on the standing committee of the law library section. And that's another place that authentication, we're trying to work with other countries, although I realize the diplomacy involved with doing stuff on the international level is very interesting, of how you have to be, careful to not be the bossy American saying we do it right, because we don't always do ours just right. But that's been really good. And I've had chances to do other task force on the Federal Depository Library Program, which I feel like I've devoted a whole lot of my career to trying to keep that program running well and doing things that are needed for that. So that was a good thing too. So
It is nice to be able to continue in sort of a elder person's role, having been president and everything else. It didn't just end for you at that point.
Yeah.
It's good for us, because we have the advantage of what you bring to the table.
Well, it's hard to find your role sometimes, because it just seems like volunteering to be on more committees is just going to be taking it away from somebody else that should be doing it. I've done those things, but I was happy to find a role, because I didn't want to stop being active. I just didn't want to.
Well, you have been active for many years. You've been recognized formally by the association, and for that, 1997, you've received the ALL Presidential Certificate of Merit. And in both 2008 and 2012, you were again formally acknowledged as a leader with additional AEL presidential certificates of appreciation. And that shows
Yeah.
that you have been sort of broad in both in terms of the years that you've been active and the sorts of things you've done.
Yeah, well, that's
In
always
in
nice.
in a positive sense. And
Yes, yeah.
I like to mention when people with whom I'm talking have had these awards, so that it gets into our record today that
Yeah.
that you have had formal recognition as well as we all know what you did
Yeah.
anyhow.
Yeah, well, and I guess again, rather other than just a plaque on the wall or something, it's
Mhm.
nice to think that somebody took note of the work that you did, because those were, all three of those times were for specific, activities that I.
You also mentioned your work on the Federal Depository Library Council to the public printer, and as I recall, you've had 2 terms on that.
Yeah.
Which
yeah.
is one more than probably most of the people who've been on it have had.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting, because the first time I got appointed in 1987,
Mhm.
looking back, I was really pretty still fresh to the scene. But I
Mhm.
think I just kind of might have got lucky there too, that to get that appointment. But it was a really good experience to get to know a whole new group of people, which was a lot of people that were involved in council were in American Library Association's Government Documents Roundtable, and I had not been part of that group, and I realized that the law librarian on council was sort of the odd one out in a lot of senses, and there was sort of a attitude that law librarians were different, or were standoffish or stuck up or whatever. So that was it had to be dispelled, and to become part of the group and accepted in that environment was something that I worked really hard on, I think, to try to do, and I really enjoyed it. And some of the people I met through that, then that translated into other activities, but I enjoyed that very much. And then it was 18 years later that I got appointed again after I'd been AAL president. But when they ask you again, I guess you think, can I contribute something? And I kind of felt maybe I had something else to offer
Having
then.
been the president
Yeah,
yourself,
yeah.
and realizing that you want to hear yes when you ask somebody.
Oh, right.
I
And
can
also,
understand.
we had the issue of authentication, which by that time the government printing office had taken up with
Mhm.
FDSys and so forth. But just making sure that that was understood by the broader government information community, why that was important or what was important about it in the legal sense. So I think always the law librarian, there's almost always one appointed each year, that person has kind of the responsibility to, bring forth some of the legal information issues within government. So I've thoroughly enjoyed both terms on there, and again, either made new contacts or strengthened contacts that I already had by the work there. So yeah, that was a good experience, definitely. Yes.
Sounds like it.
Now, I know you've done other things. Your record of for scholarship in a broad sense, I guess you take your role as a faculty member very seriously.
Yeah.
I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
But you have not only taken it seriously, but you've done the sorts of things that one might expect somebody with that role to also want to be a part of, and that is you've gone out and published some of your stuff. We've also spoken extensively about matters that are important. You want to talk a little bit about that aspect of your work?
Oh, sure. I guess, I haven't, I guess most of my writing and scholarship and speaking, all those things has been centered on the subjects that have been the, focus of my work as a law librarian and within documents, because early on I was writing articles mostly about law libraries and the depository program, and about the collections of specific, core collection for law library things, or Save the Depository program. I did, lots of articles and newsletter things, and I did do a few more slightly scholarly things. One thing I did a few years ago co-authored with Tim Coggins, were asked to write a chapter in a book that was about government information, and we wrote about authentication, and it was an international, sort of thing. There were different things in the book, and our chapter was focused on authentication, and that was a really good experience, trying to explain it to the broader library community. So, and of course, speaking with AALL, I got so many opportunities on chapter visits from being on the board one term as a board member and then as president. I think I counted up, I had 13 chapter visits over my 6 years on the board, and I enjoyed every one of those. And that was always, I tried to have a talk that was about them and about AALL both. And so that was fun. And I think, I certainly don't think I'm a great public speaker, but I'm way better than I would have been had I not had so many chances to practice. And I guess with all that stuff, you improve the more you do it.
I suspect the best speakers are the ones who are most nervous about whether they're any good at it. Because then they work on it and are good.
Yeah, and I think always trying to be prepared for what you're doing, but and having your heart in what you're talking about too is another good thing.
Sally, it's interesting. You are not the director here at the university, but you've had actually essentially most of your career one director. Now you have a new one, but it's sort of unusual in a way that you have been able to play such a major role. And I think that goes back to the support that the institution and your director and others have provided to not only encourage you to be involved, but to empower you to do it by giving you time to do this, and probably a certain amount of assistance in travel and other costs that are associated with it. You want to talk about how you, as somebody who's been a recipient of obviously some of that, view that as perhaps an important part of what we should strive to do more broadly, perhaps, in the profession.
Yeah, Valparaiso University has been amazingly supportive of my professional activities, and I'm extremely grateful for that. And maybe at the beginning they didn't even know exactly that what they were getting in for with that, but the money to have memberships in different organizations and to travel to the meetings, both going to annual meetings and when I was involved with the Chicago chapter, I made numerous trips back and forth on the South Shore train into Chicago. I always felt the responsibility then to do a lot of work to justify that I wasn't just going to meetings to goof around. I really had purpose for that, but it sort of culminated when I was on the board, and then when I ran for president of AALL, our dean at the time, Jay Conason, said, he was very excited because he liked us to be active and out in the world. And, Valparaiso is a small town or a small school, that was, seen as a value, which I really appreciated. But he said, what are you going to need if you get elected president? And I said, well, let me think about that. And then when I was elected, that year, the annual meeting when I was coming in as president was in St. Louis, and that we have a lot of our law school alums in St. Louis. So the dean organized a reception at the annual meeting, invited some of our St. Louis alums, and also I could invite my best friends, colleagues in the association, and that was really special. I really appreciated that. But when he said, what is it you need, I said, we all teach here. We have a small staff of librarians. Yeah. They're going to all hate me. I'm not the director. I can't just assign my work to other people. I'm going to need someone to help. So actually what Valparaiso did was hire a newly minted MLS JD for a year. Maribel Nash came for a year and I still came to work every day, but I was doing mostly AALL work plus the depository. Some of my parts of my job I still did, but Maribel did the teaching and reference and grading and meeting with students that I really couldn't pawn that off on everybody else and feel good about it. And I mean, through the years, Mary Persine was a wonderful, generous, gracious director to allow me to do this, and I really do appreciate that, because it would have been pretty easy to shut down a lot of my activities if I'd been told we don't have any travel money for you to do this, or your phone. But now it isn't such a big deal. But back then you're using too much time on the phone for this, or but it was always made, if you want to do it, we support you to do it, and that's been a great thing.
Well, I think that says a great deal in positive ways about Mary, as well as the dean and others.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, and sometimes you take it for granted until you find out that's not the case. Other places that might not have. I should not just assume that would have happened naturally. So I do appreciate that, and I guess I would say for any in other institutions that supporting your people to be get to do the most work that they can, because for someone who's been her whole career in one place, I feel like my life has been so enriched by the colleagues across the country now, some across the world, and also over across the generations. I was able to find some older, more experienced mentors along the way, but also to now be friends with the people that are coming up, and not that they want to hear everything about the past, but just, remind them of things sometimes too. So I think it's I can't say enough about how important to my life that has been, my professional life and personal life too. So.
Well, apparently you must have impressed a lot of people very well, because I noticed just this year, 2014, you have received 2 more very prestigious awards, one from the association and another from the university. You talked about Bob Oakley, who for many years was our Washington Affairs representative, and in addition to his so-called day job as director at Georgetown in D.C.
Right.
And you have this year's Oakley Award from the association for all your work, especially in the government area, government documents and advocacy as well.
Right.
Probably primarily the latter for that. And also at the university, you have the Distinguished Faculty Service Award.
Yeah, that was from the law school. Yeah, and that was very nice, because I believe I'm the first librarian that's ever gotten that award, and that was very special to get that here, to be recognized here at home for that. And with the Oakley Award, I guess it being selected for that did make me think back to what a gracious mentor Bob Oakley was, and when I think that I felt so, he was up here and I was down here in my knowledge, but he never made me feel that I was any less because of that, and he was just a really good mentor and friend. And so getting an award named for someone, I wish he were still here.
He was a super guy.
Yeah. So that was so those were especially nice. I mean, I guess it's always nice to get an award, but sometimes it's more meaningful than other times. So those were both meaningful.
Well, maybe I'll mention one thing about Bob Oakley that probably shouldn't even get into the oral history, but it's going to if I mention it.
Okay.
And that is that he and I would go to meetings. He was the Washington Affairs rep, and I was on the board and the presidency group for a while at the same time. And so we'd end up at the hotels earlier than most of the members would come, and what do you do? And so he and I would meet every morning at breakfast down in the whatever room they had breakfast in, and it was a lot of fun to just talk with him as a friend at those. I really enjoyed.
I know. I always think of Bob with his little cards that he would come to the board meetings with the report on, or he would pull out a card and make some notes on, because there were just so many things that he was worked on the summit. We're planning for the summit, and I think the last time that I met with Bob was we were planning the Joint Study Institute that was going to happen in June 2008, and of course he was gone by then. But I met with him to talk about that in at the hotel that's near the Georgetown Law School.
Yeah, well, he was very special, but then so are you, frankly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You know, there's a question I usually ask towards the beginning of these
Yeah.
conversations, but I didn't yet.
Okay.
And you haven't really alluded to this sort of thing, at least I don't think
Yeah.
so.
Okay.
But do you have any particular hobbies, special interests, passions outside
I
of
do
work
those.
that occupy time? And would you like
Yeah.
to share anything about that?
Well, okay, really haven't said anything about my family too much, but other than just offhandedly, but my husband Adam and I've been married 42 years now, so
Ah.
he's still a big part of my free time life, and our 2 adult children, and we have 3 grandsons now, and so that's certainly something. I'm not a huge hobby person. That would be my husband. He's got lots of hobbies. I don't have so many, but I do like to travel, and I've had wonderful opportunities both through AALL and through his professional activities. We've gotten to travel to lots of places around the world. I have several groups of women friends longtime friends that get together and do some traveling together. We have 2 Siamese cats. I
The
like
bosses,
to,
huh?
yeah. I like to read. I don't have things that I'm assuming someday when I retire I will have more time to do. But like to do fitness things and go to the YMCA that's near our house, and so yeah, those are all things that I enjoy. But I don't have that kind of hobbies of sports or collecting things that some people might have that are interesting. But I feel like I have just enough time to do what I'm doing right now. So yeah.
Well, it's nice to watch your children grow up and the grandchildren to come, and then of course many of us in that role like to say that we get to spoil the grandchildren
Yeah.
and send them home to their parents
Right,
to deal
right.
with.
Well, and the thing is, it's funny because my kids remember so much about AALL because the annual meeting, me going off to the annual meeting was always a big deal because I had to have a whole plan for what they would all do at home, my husband and kids, while I was away. And when my annual meeting as president, they all came, and that was very special. They thought that was very cool to be there. So yeah, finally get to see what I've been talking about all these years. So.
That's good. Well, Sally, we're kind of nearing the end of today's conversation, and again, is one of my customary questions to ask if there's anything we've not talked about that you would like to mention.
Oh, well, I guess maybe just 2 things. One, I feel really strongly that it's good for all of us to remember that AALL's role in advocacy isn't something that has always been the way it is now. I mean, I think probably from the very beginning of the association, our members were, strong advocates for things and tried to influence outside groups and so forth. But it seemed like when I came on the scene in the 80s that we were in a sort of a bind there, that we were feeling like we shouldn't be doing that sort of work. And then thinking changed, and our strong, focused, organized advocacy efforts with now the Government Relations Office in D.C. that's evolved from the early times in the early 1990s. I think it's great, and when I talk to younger members, newer members to the association, I kind of bring that up because I think, not that I think it's going to go away, but I think we shouldn't take it for granted that it just sprung from nowhere. It was a lot of people's really hard work, and Bob Oakley, Mary Alice Page, and Joanne Zeke. I mean, there were a number of people, and the presidents and the boards that supported that. So that would be one thing. And I guess the other thing is just sometimes you just don't know where things are going to take you. I think at that first annual meeting that I went to, and I could have never guessed how much this association would have meant to my life and my career. And, I mean, sometimes just being in the right place at the right time, like you get into a job and then the one thing leads to another. And I guess that's just kind of the way life goes. And sometimes you don't see the big plan, but things, but a lot of good open fronts. And I hope in the future, whatever changes happen in the association, I hope that we never lose that that we still like getting together. And, you know, I remember at that first meeting, all these people coming up to Matt and hugging him. And I thought, gosh, I wonder if anyone will ever hug me. You know, I wonder if I'll ever have any friends that are really excited to see me when I come to the meeting. And of course, now I do have those friends, but, you know, at the annual meeting, past presidents, as you know, you have a lot less to do and more free time, but getting together with my longtime friends in the association and colleagues is still a joy to me. And so I'll, even after I retire, like you, I will still be coming. So those are my things. I mean, I'm just, you know, I'm really grateful, and I'm grateful to you and your colleagues that are doing these interviews, because I think it's really been, you know, if somebody watches this in the future, that'll be great. But even if they don't, I've enjoyed so much reminiscing with you about these things. So thank you. So.
Well, on that, and Sally, I want to thank you for participating today with this conversation. And in thanking you, I'm doing it not only on my own behalf, but also on behalf of Michelle Wu, Frank Hodek, and Dick Spinelli, with whom I have the honor and privilege of putting together this oral history of law librarianship for the Spinelli's Law Library Reference Shelf portion of Hein Online. Thank you for today.
You're welcome.